Now, when the Working Dog team set about writing their first play, The Speechmaker, they wanted to explore the widening gap between what our political leaders say and the ethics and morality of what they actually do in practice. So on that basis, I figure they would have got enough material for a year-long TV series just on that principle. But they've condensed it to, I'm sure, what will be an action-packed 90-minute play, which is about to kick off at the Melbourne Theatre Company. It's not just the storyline that is very compelling, which you'll hear more from when James and co come up to the stage shortly, but it also has an A-list of characters, including stars, including Eric Thompson, Cat Stewart, Lockie Hume, Jane Harbour and Nicholas Bell. What's not to like about all of that? Now, biting satire is something that our principal guests do extremely well. Rob Sitch and Santal Chilara are two of the brains behind some of Australia's best-known and popular TV shows like Frontline, The Panel, Funky Squad and The Hollow Men. I love Funky Squad, actually. It's one of my favourites. So does Santa. And, of course, those unforgettable movies, The Castle and The Dish. So they've given us unforgettable characters, inflicted on a grateful nation, characters from Mike Moore to Russell Coit. And they've all been great, as I'm sure the cast of the characters in the play will be. Now, making this first Working Dog play a theatrical reality is one of this country's leading and most innovative theatre directors. Sam Strong is the Associate Director of the Melbourne Theatre Company, and he's worked with many of Australia's leading actors, such as Robin Nevin, Asher Keddy and David Wenham. Our interlocutor today is James Button. Many of you here will know James. He forged a stellar career at The Age as a writer, editor and foreign correspondent, picking up 2 Walkleys along the way. But in more recent years, and the real reason why he's here, he served as a speechwriter for Kevin Rudd. And as James will happily tell you, that was a truly character-forming experience. I think he's just out of therapy. Now, before I turn it over to the special guests, I just want to play you a snippet of Lockie Hume, thanks to Channel 10, one of the stars of The Speechmaker.
Since winning a Logie and Actor Award for playing a Packer, Lockie Hume's been a busy man. And having conquered the screen, he's trying his hand at something a little more thespian-y. Working Dog, the production team that brought us The Dish and The Castle.
How much? 800. Dreaming.
And television shows such as Thank God You're Here.
It looks like a drill, but there's another attachment coming.
Are making their stage debut with Lockie and Offspring's Cat Stewart in The Speechmaker. It's a political tale we'll all recognise, because if there's one thing pollies from all over the world love to do, it's give speeches. Long, drawn-out speeches.
Please welcome the very entertaining Lockie Hume, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, man. Take us through it. What is The Speechmaker all about?
Well, it's the Working Dog guys have written it, and it's their first players, I think. By the way, those intros. I seriously wish every time I walked into a room, they'd play the project intro for me.
I think you're a
Just make it
narcissist.
sound awesome. I've tipped about 101 on the narcissist scale, which is them. The Working Dog guys have written it.
You were at 107. That was your score before you walked in the studio. You actually come down.
I've clocked. I've clocked myself. The Working Dog guys who obviously did The Castle and The Dish and The Hollow Man have written a play. It's set on Air Force One during a national security crisis that the President of the United States must deal with. Now, everything seems to be popping along fine until my character shows up and things go a little pear-shaped.
Oh, it sounds delicious.
It's very funny, but it's also got we had a run through today, the show, the Working Dog guys were there today. It was a bit like an episode of 24 at one part. It's very exciting, and hopefully will be a good night out. So,
And whenever Working Dog do anything, it's always exciting. They set the bar in this country in entertainment. So doing a play, this is like an event play, which doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I think we've got a fantastic cast of Cat Stewart and Jane Harbour from Offspring, Eric Thompson from Packed to the Rafters, David James, who's another sort of Working Dog regular, is in it, Toby Truslove, whole bunch of wonderful people. And I think, look, quite frankly, I hate doing theatre. It's 8 shows a week. You don't get paid well. It's too much like hard work. And anyone who knows me knows I'm lazy. And so The reason I'm doing this show is because I was given an ironclad guarantee, and I'm going to pass that on to you and to the audience tonight. It will be the greatest show in the history of the world.
That's impossible to.
I can't build that lead up. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Santo, Sam, and Rob, and I'll hand over to James Button to take us through what's going to be a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Michael. We're here to talk about the Speechmaker and how Working Dog, in partnership with the MTC, put this play together. But Mark Baker from the Press Club has asked me to start by saying a few words about the experience of being a speechwriter. I had a very brief, unsung career as a speechwriter for Kevin Rudd. Not long after I'd arrived in Canberra, somebody sent me an email, a New Yorker cartoon by email. And the New Yorker cartoon shows a president sitting at a desk, and he's reading a paper, and a flunky hovers nearby, and the president says, "It's good, but change, her tawny body glistened under an azure sky, to national problems need national solutions." The dream of being a speechwriter, and it does happen from time to time, is to be there when the world is changed through language. Ted Sorensen wrote for JFK, is believed to have written the line, there's a thing called the Speechwriters Compact, you don't say what you wrote because it's the politician's words, but is believed to have written the line, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what, not, yes, but what your country, you know what I'm saying? That one. Don Watson, of course, played a role, wrote the Redfern speech and the Unknown Soldier. The Unknown Soldier is one of the great speeches. I think that they're both two wonderful speeches. The Redfern speech changed Australia in many ways. And John Favreau, 27 when he became Barack Obama's speechwriter, wore white T-shirts and Ray-Bans to the White House, dated actresses, and was named as one of Time's most influential people, 100 most influential people in the world. That's the dream of being a speechwriter. The reality is somewhat different. When it works wonderfully. Most of the time, the speechwriter is in a windowless room amongst a bank of other speechwriters, churning out language from a request at the end of an email. And I think that's got something to do with the gulf between the dream of language in politics and the reality. Politicians live and die in language. They know that in the end, everything they seek to do to persuade people has to be in a speech or on television, or at some point, whatever they do has to be asserted in language. So language is the hope of politics, but it is also the great terror. Paul Keating said this is the recession we had to have, and we're still explaining 20 years later that that's not what he meant. Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, you know, and it never lived it down. Malcolm Fraser said life wasn't meant to be easy, and again 40 years later we said you misunderstood, you know. And there's something about politics. And especially for a prime minister, a prime minister's words are not just, they can't be retracted, they become policy. And so there is this incredible, the speechwriter has this strange place in Canberra, both seen as someone useful, but also a kind of glorified technician whose job it is to turn our great ideas, the advisors, into language that can sell. Somebody once said, one of the economic advisors once said to another speechwriter and I, after we'd been presented with all the documents, "Go on, guys, weave your magic," and it was up to us to try to turn this economic jargon into language. So there is that gulf, and the journalists in the room will perhaps appreciate this, but advisors are like people who, if a sub-editor was not only to take out your best lines, but to write in their own best lines, and not just lines, but whole paragraphs of their musings on policy, that's what it would be like. A speech is a collective effort, you know, and so many people work on a Prime Minister's speech that the trying to get a great line through that process is sort of like trying to, I don't know, get a gazelle across, you know, the Eastern Freeway at rush hour. You know, it's just very difficult. And one experience I had is that I had to write a speech on cities policy, and and we started by saying that that Australia had urbanised a great deal in the last 50 years, and so I wrote in that the country that once rode on the sheep's back now rides the Western line into Sydney and the Lilydale line into Melbourne. And an advisor came back on an email and said, look, there's not enough rail lines in this speech, and we need some roads as well, you know. So could we have, you know, like the M2 in Sydney and the M5 and maybe some more lines in Melbourne? And I said, look, it's just a line. It's not a kind of marginal seat strategy, you know, because I had the sense that they were thinking, you know, we've got seats out there, you know, we don't have all the railway lines in. Anyway, I lost that fight. In the speech, in the final speech delivered by Kevin Rudd, the line went, the country that once rode on the sheep's back now rides the Lilydale, Werribee, Epping and Dandenong lines into Melbourne, and the M2, the M4, the M5 and the M8 into Sydney. And so the speech still matters. It still matters a great deal. Speeches can change the world. I had a fascinating experience being inside what my former boss, Terry Moran, who's here, who's the chairman of the MTC, called the belly of the beast. I learned so much from it. And we should always hope for the ideal, even though the reality doesn't meet it. I was interested, I was talking to Ray Azette from the MTC about the play, and I said, you know, this is, I think the guys have got this right, and we'll talk about this in a second, because I said to her, so this is all unfolding on a plane, right? And she said, yeah, and I said, so the speechwriter, is that Lockie Hume? And she said, no, the speechwriter isn't on the plane. The speechwriter is back in Washington. And that very much accorded with my own experience of being a speechwriter. So I think I'll now move over to this chair and we'll start talking about the Speechmaker. So I'm going to start by asking Rob or Santo just to talk about the genesis of the play. What was the first thought? I think you've said before that often a play or a TV series starts with one thought. You know, what was that?
I think after, I guess you could say after 9/11, speeches really became events.
Sorry, I was supposed to say this. Can everyone turn on there? Yeah.
Thank you.
I've never done this before. So.
Yeah, where we're collaborating.
Yeah. What, are these are microphones. After 9/11, if you summed it all up, I think everyone cottoned on to the set piece. You know, there were sort of some real moments, the extemporaneous moments. You know, that Bush stood with a megaphone, and said, you know, well, we hear you, and all those sort of moments. And then after that, I think everyone realised we can manufacture those moments. And so you know, if I cut right forward to today, the play starts with where you can, the guy's giving a very beautiful speech, but you see the auto cue, and auto cues now have directions in them. So it's pause for thought. A thought occurs to you. And we started adding those to the speech. And so I think over a period of time, I think that speeches became tools of marketing, really, and that the words you choose were important. And then I think the science of focus group and research met speech writing and event management, and then the colour blue, because every speech had that blue, and then it met very good global speech makers. You know, George Bush, if you look up YouTube, is often portrayed as giving, you know, lots of faux pas, but at the State of the Union and at those given set pieces, he was an outstanding speech maker. I don't know who wrote the words, but he would deliver them really well. And so after that, we thought, well, this idea we had, maybe it's of that time. And then what fell into our hands was, you know, probably the most speechmaker on the planet, which is Barack Obama. And as we sort of kept a running total of watching these big speeches get given, from Sarah Palin to Barack Obama and watched what happened afterwards. And then we made the observation that there's a kind of a dislocation between giving a speech and actually doing what's in the speech.
And the interesting thing about Obama is he's such a great speech giver that in the end it's almost become a negative for him because his speeches are so kind of smooth and they're fabulous. They're genuinely good speeches. But when he doesn't deliver, then it becomes like, well, as you've said, the gap between the words and the reality.
I'll give you one example because I was sitting around one day at a function with people who I rate really good observers of it and a senior politician. And we were talking about the speech he gave in Cairo. And they were marvelling at how well it was worded and how... And I'd by that stage, because we're well into this project, I didn't have the heart to say... I gave a really bad analogy because we're at sport, and I said, I didn't find him so much Viv Richards as Graham Yallop. And and they all looked at me and went... I just went, no. Too many drafts in my head. But it was interesting to watch what happened afterwards, that really... Egypt's a mess now, and not that he's at fault, but what happened, maybe the dislocation between what's hoped for in a speech and what happens is occurred as well.
So, Sano, pick up the story. That's where it started, but how did you go from there to actually turning it into a play?
It's the observation just got a little bit more. That as an observation on its own is like, well, yeah, that's okay. But to me, the big step forward was not the fact that the pretense of actually saying, oh, this is the spin that we'll put on what we really want to do. It's what comes afterwards, which is the moral issue, and that is, and it's an old quote. It's over 100 years old. Is the problem with politicians is that they lie to the press and then believe what they read. So the problem is you've gone all out to make this great speech, and there is that disconnect that Rob was talking about. But then you believe the good stuff. So that's where the trouble starts. So that's when we thought there's something in this, because he has to make a great speech. The president is now flying on Air Force One in suspended animation with a bunch of other guys that are going to advise him. A major event unfolds on the ground, 30,000 feet below. They're not connected to it at all. Something happens. They have to. The president has to make a decision, and it's going to either prove or disprove his words. It's as simple as that, really. And he has to make that decision, within 10 hours or something.
And does that need to make a decision lead to the crafting of a speech? Is that what happens on the flight?
I can't. There's a spoiler alert.
Okay, right.
I can't
all
tell
right,
you
fair
what
enough.
happens at the end.
No problem.
The snakes take over the whole plane.
Right.
I didn't want to say that, but that's what happens.
Ruins now. But anyway, there's an issue about language to be resolved.
There is a speech, as Rob said. There's a speech at the start, and there are references to future speeches on the plane.
Okay.
But it's all about his decisions on that plane.
Yes, right.
And it's.
But we had to come up with something that an enveloping, an emerging crisis involving something that he had a that represented a moral question for him, and so we were thinking of, what could we invent that didn't sound too far-fetched.
Yes.
And one of the ones that came up was something effectively that the government are recording everyone's phone conversations and internet traffic. And I was literally talking to a guy who knew some spooks, and he paused and he went... And so I went back and I went, I don't reckon that's going to fly. And the other one was, I guess, sort of, which I find very interesting, is that we said, what if they decided to bring back torture? And we decided that was too far-fetched. But what's interesting is they did bring it back, they just rebranded it. And so there was a study done, I think, of the New York Times, that there was a graph of references to torture and then references to enhanced interrogation, and the graph intersects. And I looked at that, and so I put my hand up and I go, I feel like a patsy, because unbeknownst to me, all the speeches that have been given have been subtly reworded.
That's amazing. You've decided to set this play in the United States, or it's 30,000 feet in the air, but it's a president, it's not a prime minister. Why did you throw this onto an American stage rather than rather than Australian
Have you been
stage.
on the PM 707? it's not. It's it's not really all that impressive. I think the
707. It's a Fokker 28.
Well, since the budget anyway.
In fact, I'm just wondering whether there's any journalists here who have actually plane surfed on that plane, because I've actually seen it happen. I was on Paul Keating's campaign in 1996, and one of the impressive things I saw was a couple of photographers on the way down. They took their seatbelts off, got the silver tray, and actually surfed down the down the corridor, which is a great feat. I could watch it over and over again.
You've still got time to build that in.
Yeah. There was no YouTube at the time, so you can't see it anywhere now. But I think we just wanted to make sure that the stakes were high, and we just thought may as well go straight to the president, really.
But is there something about language in the American context that is perhaps just more compelling than the Australian context? Is that part of your thinking?
I think that I do think Australians are suspicious about flowery speeches, and that's probably why we don't give them. We give them at commemoration moments, or the apology, or the Keating speech, as you said, and I think we welcome those and treasure them and store them away. But I reckon our version of the effective speech is the floor of Parliament zinger, and that's we.
I'm going to do you slowly, pal. I'm going to do you slowly.
Because sport.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I want to do you slowly.
Yeah.
So I think that those moments, ring true. Funny enough, Gillard, when her father was invoked and spoke, everyone went, that this is actually, it's got something real underneath all this.
Yeah. There's Don Watson always told a story that when the Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower, the leader stood up and made this stirring speech about the new land and the future. And when the first fleet arrived at Port Jackson, Philip stood up and read a list of regulations. Regulation 6: no men in the women's quarters, and thus speech making began and diverged.
I used to send up our constitution because the American one is we the people, forgotten now, we the people. And our constitution starts with whereas. But Santo pointed out to me years ago that he really likes that because it's without floweriness,
yes,
and it's straight to the point, and it's about straight into fairness and right and wrong. And I've swung.
Right.
Well, yes, I'd love the State of the Union used to be a letter, didn't it? I mean, was it just
It was read by a clerk.
It was read by a clerk, and you just think, well, there you go. That's here's the State of the Union, and now it's a major event.
It's an annual speech. Yeah. Sam, I'm going to bring you in. So, these guys have written a play. They've never written a play before. Where do you come into the picture here? Where does the MTC and you come into? Is Working Dog get in touch with you, or just take us through that?
Well, I'll talk about the specific genesis in a minute, but I suppose that the short answer is that we bring the theatrical expertise, I suppose, and the means of best realising this story on a theatrical stage. And there is, just picking up on that previous point about the difference between American and Australian politics, there is, there's such a strong history of fictional representations and cinematic representations of presidential administrations. We know that sort of genre from its serious manifestations to its less serious, even action film manifestations so well, and the sense of spectacle that's inherent in that genre that it gives us a great thing to kind of piggyback on. But to return to the original question, the script turned up, these guys got in touch with Brett Sheehy, who's our artistic director, and we had pretty soon after that an in-house reading.
He got it out of his junk email folder.
Yeah. Actually, there was a slightly longer story. I don't know, Rob, if you want to elaborate on that side. No,
involves a Nigerian. Anyway,
but probably the most important step was we had an in-house reading of the text. And as you would expect with a text written by the Working Dog guys, it lifted off the page immediately. And I think the company's perspective, even though we played our cards relatively close to our chest at the time, said, "Oh yeah, it's okay. Maybe need some theatrical expertise." No, but while we played our cards relatively close to our chest, there was a feeling amongst the company that we immediately wanted to do it. And my specific involvement was an extension of that, where I went to Brett on the back of that reading, and I want to direct this. I love this work, and I think the main reason for that, quite apart from all of the richness of ideas that are in there, actually, as a play and as a crafted 90-minute experience, it was, as you would probably expect, but in some ways surprised by it was as complete and as effective and as wonderful and as almost immediately stageable as anything that would turn up to us through other channels.
So what you're saying is you took it and rewrote it from top to bottom.
Well, theatre like speech making is a collective art,
Right,
where ideas are.
Can I just wrap up something about Lockie? Because Lockie doesn't like theatre, and when we approached him, he went, "Oh," and I said, "Look, we'll write it so you don't have to come on until after intermission." How many weeks before Lockie found out there's no intermission?
It was true, and the first act's going quicker and quicker, so he's on sooner and sooner than he would expect.
But Sam, these are guys who are used to, seeing the idea go from that first thought right to the finished product, right down to the editing of it, okay? At some point this time, MTC took over. How did they cope with the MTC taking their baby and making it theatrical, putting theatrical rigour into it?
I think because it isn't, if it's a takeover, which it isn't, it's certainly not a hostile one. And like as we mentioned, like speechwriting, it's very much a collaboration. And from my perspective as a director, it's an absolute privilege and a treat. It's probably like someone giving a speech that inherits something that's.
Sam, let's admit it. One day after rehearsal, it was like Gingell and Packer out the front of the MTC.
Yeah.
You and me in my tracksuit pants.
Yeah, my tooth is back in now.
I tell you, one thing that's interesting, I sort of keep a mild collection of Melbourne's hidden cultural secrets. There's a subscriber night that's only, for next year, is only about 3 months away. And you come and pitch to the subscribers, and it's all 14 productions. You get 3 minutes, and I sort of thought I'd be turning up to, a sort of like a bingo night, and it was at Hamer Hall, and I went, shooting high there, boys. And 2,500 people sit there, and it's like it's speed dating, isn't it?
And the bell rings, whatever. You're judged immediately on how well you've performed at.
I followed.
Take up the show.
I followed Robin Nevin, and I thought, look, Robin Nevin will be pretty serious. So she's cracking gags. She's doing. But so after that, I think. I think we always intended it to go as it's gone, but that you sort of got an insight into, people often point to Melbourne theatre almost in wonder in other states, and I think it's things like that you realise that underneath it all, it's so well organised, it's such a machine that you can get up original works now in Melbourne and, feel like someone's going to turn up.
But when you started, though, you didn't know that, and you've done TV, you've done feature films, you've done stand-up comedy, panel shows. Why a play? Why did you decide to move into this medium that was for you completely fresh?
Well, I think to us, we don't really think about the vehicle or the medium when we make our initial observations. So, in the past we've written fake travel guides. Now they didn't start off by saying, now we must write a book. Yeah. It starts with an observation that you make while you're travelling, and then you form your comic idea, and then you go, you know what? This might work best as a book, not as a travel documentary or a film about travel. You work out your best vehicle down the track. And with this idea, as we said, we've been sitting on this idea for a very long time. And
10 years, yeah? It's about 10 years? Or?
Yeah, about that. Yeah. I still remember when Bush landed on the aircraft with the mission accomplished. That was pretty early on in the piece as well. And that was a great moment for us when, George Bush lands on a, he could have got his chopper there. The aircraft carrier was only 30 miles off San Diego, and and delivered one of the great in the war in Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed because of you. The tyrant has fallen, and the world, all that kind of stuff. And so you make all those observations, and we just thought, you know what, this. As I said, this pressurised cooker atmosphere, it will look great on stage. It just
slightly expensive, but
it's just these people suspended in the air in this black space, and we just thought the connection that you make with a live audience will be electric. It'll be better than putting it on a screen or making it a TV show. We really felt that was where it lived.
And I think to jump on that point as well, there is in terms of the piece dealing with this opening speech and a set piece, a big theatrical set piece that goes on in front of people, there is a very nice fit between the 800 people that we can squeeze into the Playhouse and the delivery of that speech, so that we get to create a sense of spectacle in there that you might not otherwise be able to create on a.
I must admit, when we said it's set on a jumbo jet,
We went cold.
I really did look at you and go, good luck with that one. Because that's not easy to stage.
It is true that it's a closed space in terms of Air Force One is a blessing, but then one of the challenges of the production is to find ways to move very fluidly and rapidly between different spaces on Air Force One. So we need to find a theatrical way of doing that that hopefully has a sense of flair in it.
I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but let's just say there's a rotating restaurant without a circular floor at the moment.
Right. Now, you mentioned before about the US president being one of the most portrayed figures in popular culture. Was that something that made it easier or harder when you came to create the character of the president? How did all the previous imagery and characters help or hinder?
I think it's easier watching it from 10,000 miles away, because when you look into the way the Constitution drafts their powers, the president is impotent in many areas and powerful in other areas. Foreign affairs and projecting to foreign countries is his long suit, and so that's in a way that's formed his behaviour. It's otherwise he has to go back through Capitol Hill and so.
But did you have Jed Bartlett sort of over your shoulder, or
he was just too soft for me?
Yeah. I guess in many ways it was more what we didn't have, because I think in a way we had to go pretty straight, in the sense that if you have an African American president, then people will say, well, that's Obama then, or if you have a woman, you'll say, well, is this if Sarah Palin became president? So in a way, you sort of had to go, let's just go back to basics and actually make the president quite nondescript.
Going back to your first idea and then to the final product, what did you learn writing this about politics?
Well, I learned how to spell the word exeunt a lot at the end of scenes, and because there's certainly in terms of the writing, I don't think there's that much difference between writing a film or television, other than maybe the scenes go longer. But otherwise, on that front, no. But I think you're about to go on to from politics.
About politics and language, what you learned, from the process of sort of delving into it, steeping yourself in that world.
Well, I just learned that there's no story that is crazy enough, because it's kind of what happens on the plane is slightly absurd. But then I don't know whether you read last week that there's a think tank in the Pentagon that has offered $6.5 million as a grant for anyone who can start thinking up research for automated or robots in the military that will actually program to kill, but also program to have morals. And you thought, well, that's crazy. What you're going to program morals into a robot? And the rationale given by the people offering the money is, well, is it that crazy? Would you rather put your trust in a stressed soldier or a pre-programmed robot? And you sit there going, geez, that's an interesting thought. You go, what am I talking about? So there's all sorts of weird arguments and weird thoughts out there in that world.
Well, didn't the CIA work on a cigar that was going to make Fidel Castro go bald? I think, or something, when he smoked it. So yeah. So what do you think audiences can, based on what Working Dog's done before, and Sam, maybe you should answer this because you're familiar with Working Dog's work. Can they expect a very much in the line of Working Dog's work, or a departure?
I think so. And I feel slightly conscious of answering for Working Dog on behalf of Working Dog, but you'll no doubt cut me off. But I think this piece has the qualities that you would usually associate with Working Dog's body of work. The quality of its satire, its humour, the cleverness of its humour, the beautifully observed characters, the very, very strong and idiosyncratic sense of rhythm. So all of those things that sounds weird describing that to you guys, but those things that as an outsider you would associate with Working Dog's body of work are present here. I think some of the things that are new are the American setting and transposing into an American setting, and particularly transposing it into a theatrical setting, and the opportunities for occasional flair or adding moments or adding jokes, and finding the best way to tell the wonderful story that these guys have written in the theatre. So, and I think Lockie's point was a good one, if putting slightly too much pressure on the production. It is ultimately for me a wonderful night out that does that great double trick of wonderful theatre, of making people smile and think at the same time.
That seems like a really good place to stop and to take some questions from the floor. Does anyone have any questions for Sam or Rob or Santo or me? Mark, are you coming to? I
need one of those, and I need one of those.
We're going to share the mic. Andrew.
It's working.
Thank you. Are you expecting to have this broadcast or shown in some way or run in the US?
All theatre directors dream of overseas tours of their productions. I don't think there are any specific plans as yet for taking it to America, but I wouldn't say no.
I got a funny feeling it'll be like Dimboola. It'll be the old school. It'll be inflicted on school children and have no choice. But hopefully, we tried to make it a bit silly too, and silly, funny, and thoughtful, because I think merely making a rhetorical point or good observation, I don't think that gets you past the first 10 minutes. And so hopefully, fingers crossed, that laughter kind of is the best part of it.
And nor is it's one of those ones too that if it let's say gets shown there, I don't think there's any sense of, oh, will they get really upset because it's about our president? Because I think I think when people see it, it'll be pretty clear that it is about all politics. It's about power. It's about words, and it's about the disconnect between the words and the actions. And you just had to choose a leader, and you may as well choose the American leader because it probably looks the best. So it's certainly not American bashing. If that was you weren't asking about that, were you, Andrew? Okay.
James alluded to that speechwriters compact with the speechwriter not sort of saying they wrote someone else's words. But I'm just wondering about your thoughts on speechwriters literally putting words in someone else's mouth that they then own. There's a whole question of identity and who's doing the talking, etc. there. And
I find that really, really interesting, because I remember Walter Cronkite was asked about his job once, and he goes, well, it's not really a job for a grown-up. And he had enough sort of self-awareness to know he's become incredibly famous, but as he grew older, he was reading someone else's words. And I would find it weird the same disconnect, to be really emotional about words I didn't write. And it is interesting that Obama apparently is famous for sitting up all night rewording his speeches so that they are his own. But I mean, God, if you're a world leader, how could you write all those speeches?
It's a really good question, and it's something that sort of resonated down through the history of speech making. Is it ethical and right for someone to write words for someone else? Robert Menzies said that it wasn't back in the 50s. In fact, I remember when I was writing my own book, Michelle Grattan said to me, you should have a bit in your book about, whether it's right for people to write words for other people. The thing is, though, that a prime minister will give 50 speeches a month, Kevin Rudd did try to write all those 50 speeches himself, but it is a difficult thing to do when you have the small matter of running the country as well. Your notes say that Bill Clinton gave something like 500 speeches a year, 550 speeches a year or something. So it is absolutely essential to have people putting the words on the page who's not the speaker. The difficulty, I think, comes when the speech writer is asked to convey or capture some kind of emotion or some sort of feeling and has had no access to the person who is giving the speech. And James Fallows, who wrote speeches for Jimmy Carter, once sent Carter a memo pleading with him to be allowed in the room when decisions were made so that he could get a sense of what feelings and what pressures drove those decisions. But in quite usual form. He was just at the end of a long chain of requests.
I was just going to say that I think you spoke about John Favreau. Obama actually, his nickname for Jean Favreau was My Conscience. Yeah. And I don't know whether that was ironic or not, but it was My Conscience. And incidentally, John Favreau has left the White House to go to Hollywood to be a screenwriter now.
Thank you. Leo D'Angelo Fisher is my name. I'm ex-Fairfax. Who isn't? Working Dog, I want to say to you, as I say in the classics, you're my biggest fan. But my question is to James. How do you get from the speechwriter's craft to the arcane jargon of Kevin Rudd? What happens in that process?
From programmatic specificity, you mean? And what can I say? Look, I think that in the case of Kevin Rudd, I think he had a particular problem with a need to write his own speeches, which at some level is understandable. I mean, the speech giver is the most important person in this equation, and they have to live with the words. So that was obviously something that's understandable. But as I said, prime ministers give so many speeches; they have to let that go. He was unable to let go of that process, and in hindsight, I think it's a microcosm of a huge problem with trust that he had, that in the end was responsible for his failure as a Prime Minister and his downfall as a Prime Minister, because he was unable to take the advice of others on a whole range of fields, of which the speech writing process was just one. So I do think when it works, the person is inside the head of the politician and uses their language powerfully and uses their words, because it's got to be their words. But that requires a relationship, such as Keating and Watson had. You know, Keating once said, it's a very intimate thing having a speechwriter. It's a bit like your thing about the conscience, because somebody who is writing for you is thinking for you as well. Now, that didn't end well, that relationship, probably in part because it was so intimate. And when it worked for those two, it worked superbly. But when there became a decision about whose words they were, discussion about whose words they were, then that's when we see the rupture that has happened. I hope the relationship between a leader and a speechwriter can survive, because I think when it works, the results can be magnificent.
G'day, guys. I was just wanting to ask, it's one thing to have the idea for the story, such as Frontline and Hollow Man and all of that, and to create the satirical effect and all of that. But at the end of the day, there's got to be a worry for you guys about the credibility of creating either the show or the play. And I've always been intrigued watching particularly the Hollow Men with the reruns that were on recently. I love it, absolutely love it. Having worked in government media unit, to see the characters and how wonderfully you've exposed those characters. I can see each one of those characters, the press secretary, the office PA in our office from back in the 80s and the 90s and whatever. How much research do you do? You're very modest about being able to come up with a brilliant idea, but to get the credibility, there must be an incredible amount of research. And have you got some sort of whiz-bang unique way of finding all of that out?
Look, we really do enjoy the research, because often it involves catching up with someone, having coffee or a drink, and often it's not the answer to the question that you thought was a good one, just in them talking about it. And that was the Hollow Men was interesting, is that for years we'd gone up to the tally room on election night for no purpose, in that we just sensed that it was a fun place to be. And we used to talk to people and operatives, and in fact, in 2 elections ago, when Kevin Rudd took over, one of the Howard cabinet ministers, it's in a converted gym and cables are everywhere, and it doesn't look like where history's made. And there was a cabinet minister smoking a cigarette with a phone. He saw us and he goes, "John's gone." John's gone. and he's just announced the Prime Minister's lost his seat with a fag in his boots and the thing outside of a portable toilet. And it's just... So it's often I think we enjoy that first, and then later on we go, gee, that's a funny, and we'll notice something. But it is interesting how... I think it's one of the parts of your jobs that I envy, is I think it's a real skill to approach people and talk to people. And I reckon if I had my time again, I'd do our research and I'd have a good journo doing parallel, because it's that having that ear for, or an eye for something that sticks out. And also the fun, where you find facts. We had to, when we did the Hollow Man, we had to get a plan of the Prime Minister's office. Now, the blueprint. And you think, well, post 9/11, who's going to give that to us? And then I thought, but there was a nicer time, and they would have put a book out. So I went into the State Library and found a book, The Architecture of Parliament House, which had the blueprints in it, and stood in the State Library photocopying the Prime Minister's blueprint plans, and we had to ask what some of the rooms were, and so I showed it to a cabinet minister, and he went, "Oh, that's where his secret toilet is." For all the time he'd been in the office, there's this back part that opens up, and he's got his own little bathroom. I think that research for us is it's got that little fun bit. And that's what's so enjoyable about it.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. My name is Fiona Lander. My question was just in relation to your productions, because my feeling really is that Working Dogs productions are unique in that they not only reflect Australian society, but also influence it going forward. So my favourite example is Frontline not only reflected the state of current affairs journalism, but was used in English curricula to demonstrate to students just how appalling the reporting actually was and teach them not to trust TV. And I still remember that. I guess what I would ask you is, what would you like the message to be from the Speechmaker?
Well, there are lots of... That's funny you raise Frontline in that sense at school, because I'll never forget a friend of mine who lives in Sydney said, "Oh, my daughter's doing Frontline in VC or whatever it is up in Sydney. Can she speak to you about, she's about to do her exam, can she speak to you about Frontline?" I said, "Of course." And the first thing she said is like, "Can you tell me about the sexual politics in the office?" And I'm sitting there going, I got no idea about that. So in a way, with Frontline, all we wanted to do is we thought the state of current affairs was it was funny at the time. It was in the mid-90s. There were some heavyweights. It looked funny. We joined a few dots and then spoke to a few people to ask whether what we were doing was, completely outrageous. And we were told, no, you could go further. And which we ignored because it wouldn't have been, it would have sounded like we went too far. So in a way, all we were doing is watching television at night, joining dots on things that we already saw, and then just making it funny. Now, I don't think we aimed at making it any bigger. We certainly didn't do it so that we could be on the school's curriculum or anything like that. But it's funny how sometimes if you stay true to your observations, you never know where it ends up. We didn't know the castle was going to end up where it... The castle was almost a practice movie when we made it. So we don't really think very much about it. So for this particular play, I don't know where it's going to end up. Maybe it'll just be what it is, and which is fine. But we don't really look forward that far at our work, and we don't. I don't think we did Frontline as a piece so that people can actually change current affairs. In fact, we failed miserably if that were the case, because it hasn't improved all that much.
I also find I can never predict what will resonate. That the castle's a good example. Is that I had no idea that certain phrases would be picked up on, and certain aspects. And this play is interesting. Is because we called it the Speechmaker, it almost struck a chord that I didn't predict. That everyone deep down knows there's something wrong with the way speeches are used, or in the manipulation, or that words are getting inflicted on us, that we're being, focus grouped, and so that's been the chord that struck. But as I say, I'm not a very good predictor of that.
Well, my only thing that I would add to that is that, as I mentioned before, I think the thing that's characterised the work of these guys and what makes it such a treat to work on, from my perspective, is the quality of the observation. And as you say, true to your observations, and people recognise, and we as an audience recognise that and recognise ourselves in that. And I think that's true, as true of this play and this production as it is of the previous work.
You all know it's a musical, don't you?
Might be next time you see it.
If you love the Jersey Boys, you'll love this.
Rob, can I just ask, going back to the process stories, what was the pitch for getting a fly fishing series onto primetime television?
I go, this is like a stone that I never get out of my shoe. I say, it was a camouflage travel, two guys, and I always say to people, you want to ruin a holiday, film it, because that was back in the days. We took film cameras around the world. That was pre 9/11, but we were still stopped at borders and all this sort of stuff. And funnily enough, I keep going. No one will ever believe me that it was a really hard job. And then I look now and there's two guys in Beijing, and I go, that's what we should have done. Dump the fly fishing and just go to Beijing and sit on their asses for a couple of weeks.
Any other questions?
Hi, gentlemen. David Polton. Can I just ask what's on the drawing board for Working Dog, if we can reveal that? And can I also ask, in Santo's real field of expertise, are Australia really the worst team in the World Cup?
The quick answer to that is yes. Don't spread that. Then they might struggle this time round just a little bit. They'll be very entertaining for the first 10 or 15 minutes of each of their games. And then I think you may as well, if you know what flight is coming in from Rio, the first flight coming in from Rio after their last game, you can almost book yourself in there to say hello to them back at the airport. So they're not going to stay there for very long. At the moment, we're very busy editing a new series that will be seen on the ABC in a couple of months' time, Michael. In August on the ABC, it's called Utopia. It's similar it's similar to the Hollow Men, and we're just getting that together now. And so that'll be on in a couple of months' time. And apart from that, I'll be working on some soccer shows on Fox Sports. Anything else, Rob? I think that's about it, isn't it?
No, I just feel you must feel lucky that this is not being filmed, because you wouldn't have friends in the Socceroos, would you, Santo?
They can handle it.
Yeah, Tony Abbott just winked and he got in trouble.
Sorry. They're going to do really badly. I'm winking. It's a joke.
You haven't saved it.
Are there any other questions? I'm going to... Yes, there's a question at the back there.
Thanks. Australians hold their politicians in notorious disregard. Is that their fault because of their myriad character deficiencies, or is it the speechwriter's fault?
I'm taking what's that, mate? Yeah. Look, I think politicians often get a bad rap, actually. I think a lot of them are, apart from the ones who are psychopathic and crazy, and I think a lot of them are actually trying... One of the things I learned going to Canberra was that government is really hard and doing things is really difficult, and the speed at which you have to do things and the pressure that is on you, you're juggling 28 things at the same time. when you find a good politician, they are an exceptional person, usually, with a whole lot of skills and character as well to survive in that world. And we still, you know, it's easy to be cynical, but I think we still do have some good politicians, you know. We need more, we need a lot more, but it's just astonishing to go inside that world and just see how difficult it is. Yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give. Question there by the window.
Thank you. My name is Jim Clark. With Frontline, when that was aired, it was groundbreaking, and it certainly reflected one side or one view of current affairs programs at the time. Since then, current affairs programs have evolved into something worse. Do you think that the current affairs programs actually learned something from Frontline, and so therefore you do this country a disservice? Thank you.
I often I often wonder about that you actually, whether you're giving them. We did an episode of the Hollow Men that was about the budget, and they had no centrepiece. Everything was $150 million, and that there's a scene in it where they come in and say, so we've got a $20 billion centrepiece on health, and because it made everyone go, that was the, and when the budget came out, it was like they'd watched the show and go, that's actually a really good idea. So I don't have the answer, Jim. I feel it's right though that you give people a permission to feel that someone else is out there that thinks like them, and that you give people a bit of a tool to see it better. But I think it's anywhere from marginal to a bit. But you know you know, what is it, the dogs bark and the circus goes on. But I just, the one thing I would say on that, on what you were saying before about politicians, I'm saying take left and right out of it for a second. Prior to the election, Tony Abbott came up with what, just as an observer, seemed like a really streamlined line. He said no cuts to this, no cuts to that, no cut. He itemised it. He knew exactly what he was doing. You know, I'm sure they did all the research in the world. He knew exactly how to deliver it. And then within 6 months, backflipped on nearly all of it. And it's almost like you could see he saw the problem as not that he was backflipping on a promise, that he hadn't come up with a formulation of words to explain it. And he came up with fundamentally honest. And I look at that and I go, I heard on a radio a guy ring up and said, why aren't they taken before the Trade Practices Act? And the host had the same reaction as me. He goes, oh, well, you can't do that. And then as I drove down the road a bit more, I went, it's probably the one area of life where you know, if Coles did that or Woolworths did that, you would be up on some sort of charges. You can't do that in any other. And so I wonder whether we'd all be better off, you know, as well as FIFO, that there was some, you know, electoral mechanism where when people vote for you, at least to some extent they know what you're going to do. Because that, I don't think the last, yeah, isn't that bizarre that sounds odd? So that's my one thing, is I look on and I go, hang on, I think we've got Stockholm Syndrome here. We're starting to identify with our captors. So that's the one thing. Take left and right out. I don't think it's enough to say, well, you can always vote them out. They've got $500 billion a year before we vote them out. So that's my one thing, that I'm not satisfied with that answer now, even though I accepted it, you know, up until recently.
Any more questions?
Sorry? Someone say something I can use?
This isn't a question, this is actually refuting your being true to life or under your marginal influence. I ended up with the box set that the ABC sent to the Federal Speaker of the House's office of the Hollow Men, because none of the staff wanted to take it home because they said it was much too light being at work.
Well, can I just add to that? When I started
Sorry,
in Canberra,
Bronwyn Bishop put that up for auction the other night at the fundraiser.
On my first day in Canberra, a senior public servant came to me and she said, do you want some advice? And I said, yes. She said, watch every episode of The Hollow Men. So
For ideas or? All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Rob, to Sam, and to Santo for this terrific explanation of the Speechmaker. We should all go and see it. I very much look forward to seeing it. And you know, may it thrive, and may it end up in the US as a documentary, as a TV comedy show. Thank you all for coming.
Please give it up for James Button as well, who I think was a fantastic interlocutor. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Please stick around, have a chat to friends, and don't forget the next Fane Mitchell lunch on June the 12th. It's worth going to. And of course, go to the Melbourne Theatre Company website for tickets to this fantastic play. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.